If you have ever had someone call control love, then stay with me. Because what happened to me did not begin with shouting. It began with a soft voice, a worried smile, and one sentence that made me feel guilty for even questioning my own son. He said, "Mom, I'm just worried about your memory." 2 weeks later, he controlled my bank account. And the worst part was this. First, I thanked him. If you're listening tonight, tell me where you're listening from. And if you've ever had family make you question your own mind, stay until the end. Because I did not scream. I did not beg. I did not make a scene. I watched. I listened. And when the bank manager finally looked up and said my name first, everything changed. My name is Eleanor Whitmore. I'm 71 years old, and I live alone in a quiet neighborhood just outside Columbus, Ohio. It's the same white clapboard house my husband and I bought back in 1987. The shutters are blue now. They used to be green. My husband, Harold, used to paint them himself every few years, standing on an old aluminum ladder I never trusted. He always whistled while he worked. Usually Sinatra. Always slightly off-key. He'd look down at me, grin, and say, "It sounds better up here." Harold has been gone for 3 years. Pancreatic cancer. Fast. Cruel. The kind that takes a man in pieces while everyone around him keeps pretending there's still time. After he passed, people came by with casseroles and pound cakes and paper plates. They spoke softly in my kitchen. They touched my arm a lot. They said things like, "If you need anything, just call." Most of them meant it for a week. Few meant it longer. My son Daniel cried at the funeral. Real tears. His shoulders shook. He stood in the church parking lot afterward, held both my hands and said, "I've got you, Mom. You're not alone." At that moment I believed him completely. Daniel is my only child. When he was little, he had a tender heart. He cried over stray dogs. He brought me dandelions from the yard like they were roses. He hated seeing anyone left out. When he was 8, he invited a shy little boy from school to his birthday party because, in his words, "He looks lonely, Mom." That is the boy I raised. Or at least, that is the boy I thought stayed inside the man. Daniel is 46 now. He lives about 25 minutes away with his wife, Melissa, and their 2 children, Grace and Ben. Grace is 12. Ben is 9. They live in one of those newer neighborhoods with matching mailboxes, neat sidewalks, and homes that always look a little too polished to be fully lived in. Melissa likes things to look polished. That's probably the cleanest way to say it. She is never disheveled, never rushed, never loud. That was part of what made her difficult to read. Women like Melissa are rarely the ones who raise their voices. They don't have to. They make control sound like good manners. They make disrespect sound like efficiency. They make exclusion sound like concern. To the outside world, she was lovely, organized, attentive, graceful. At church, she held my elbow going down the steps, even when I didn't need help. At school events, she introduced me as Daniel's mom, then smiled as if that were generous. At family dinner, she called me Mom, in a voice so sweet it almost covered the distance in it. Almost. After Harold died, Daniel started dropping by more often. First, I found it comforting. He'd stop in after work, lean against the kitchen counter, ask if I needed anything fixed around the house. Sometimes he brought coffee. Sometimes he brought groceries. Sometimes he just brought questions. Did I remember to pay the water bill? Had I taken my blood pressure medicine? Did I still drive at night? Was I sleeping well? Did I ever forget appointments? The first few times I thought he was being thoughtful. Then I started noticing the pattern. The questions were never asked all at once. They were scattered, gentle, carefully placed, like someone laying down stones across a river before trying to cross it. The first time he said the word memory, it was a rainy Tuesday afternoon in March. I was standing at the stove making tomato soup from scratch. Real soup. Butter, garlic, onion, crushed tomatoes, cream. The kind Harold loved with grilled cheese and too much black pepper. Rain was tapping softly against the kitchen window. The radio was low. Had reached into the wrong cabinet for the salt. That was all. One wrong cabinet. I laughed at myself and said, "Oh, for heaven's sake, I keep moving things." Daniel didn't laugh. He leaned back against the counter and looked at me with that careful expression people use when they want credit for being kind. Then he said, "Mom, I'm just worried about your memory. I remember exactly how still the room felt after that. The soup bubbling, the spoon in my hand, the smell of garlic, the rain, everything normal. And then one sentence hanging in the middle of my kitchen like it had every right to be there. I turned and looked at him. What do you mean? He gave me a sad little smile, the kind meant to make you feel unreasonable if you push back. I've just noticed some things, he said. Little things. You repeating stories. Forgetting where you put stuff. I just don't want you struggling alone. Now, at 71, you expect your body to change. You expect your knees to ache in the cold. You expect your eyes to need brighter light. You expect your hands to stiffen a little in the morning. But your mind? That's different. Your mind is not just function. It's dignity. It's identity. It's the last place you still expect to belong entirely to yourself. So when your own child looks at you as if you might be slipping away from yourself, something inside you tightens. I told him I was fine. And I meant it. I was fine. I paid my bills on time. I kept my appointments. I still drove myself to church, to the grocery store, to my doctor, to lunch with friends. I balanced my checkbook every Friday morning the same way I had for 40 years. I handled the mortgage, the taxes, the insurance, the utilities, the savings, the trust Harold and I had set up years earlier. I had not suddenly become helpless because I reached into the wrong cabinet. But Daniel nodded as if he knew better. That was the beginning. After that, the comments came more often. Never harsh. Never direct. Always gentle enough to make me feel rude for resisting them. Did you remember your cardiology appointment, Mom? Yes. You told me that story before. Maybe I did. Melissa said you seemed a little overwhelmed last Sunday. Melissa said. Melissa noticed. Melissa worried. It is amazing how much authority some people borrow by sounding calm. I began second-guessing myself. Not because I was forgetting more, but because someone I loved had started looking at ordinary human moments as evidence. I wrote more lists. I checked the stove twice before bed. I put sticky notes on the fridge. Trash on Thursday. Water the fern. Pick up prescription Friday. I began arriving to appointments early because being late suddenly felt dangerous. Not dangerous in itself. Dangerous because it could be interpreted. That is how people get inside your head. Not by proving you are weak. By making you afraid of appearing weak. About 2 weeks after that soup conversation, Melissa invited me to brunch. Just the three of us. No children. That alone should have told me something. Melissa never did anything without a reason. We met at a trendy little cafe with white subway tile walls, tiny glass vases, and a menu that made eggs sound like a lifestyle decision. Melissa kissed my cheek. Daniel stood when I sat down. They were both so polite it made the back of my neck go cold. We ordered. Then they exchanged that look married people get when they've already rehearsed the conversation in the car. Daniel cleared his throat. Mom, we've been talking. No sentence that begins that way has ever improved anyone's day. Melissa reached over and laid her hand on mine. I hope you know this is coming from love, she said. That phrase should come with a warning label. Usually when someone says something is coming from love, it's about to come with pressure attached. I smiled, but only barely. Well, I said, that makes me nervous already. Melissa gave a soft laugh. Daniel leaned in. We've just noticed you've had a lot on your plate since Dad passed. That was true. Widowhood is 1,000 practical tasks, wrapped in one long emotional ache. But I said nothing. He continued. And we think it might make sense if I helped with some of the financial stuff for a while. I looked at him. What financial stuff? The bills. The banking. The online things. Just the practical side. I almost laughed. Harold had never handled the practical side. I had. For decades. Harold was many wonderful things. Organized with paperwork was not one of them. He could rebuild a porch railing from scratch, but if you handed him an insurance statement, he looked like you had passed him a foreign language exam. I handled the money. I always had. Melissa leaned in a little closer. Just temporarily, she said. Just until things feel easier. Temporarily. That word has ended more freedoms than people realize. I said I didn't need help. Daniel nodded as if he expected that answer. Then he said very softly, Mom, please don't take this the wrong way. We just think it would be wise to add me to the account. Just in case. Just in case. There it was. Not give me control. Not you can't manage. Just in case. That is how people ask for the front door key to your independence. They don't say they want the house. They say they want to be helpful if there's ever an emergency. Melissa slid a folder across the table. She had brought paperwork to brunch. Prepared paperwork. Carefully printed. Neatly tabbed. And that told me everything I needed to know. Because when someone shows up with forms before you've agreed to the conversation, they are not expressing concern. They are executing a plan. I picked up the folder. The pages were clean and formal and heavily explained in Melissa's bright voice. This is just so things would be easier. This is very normal. This doesn't mean you're giving anything away. No pressure. People always say there's no pressure while applying it. I told them I wanted to review everything at home. Melissa's smile tightened for half a second. Daniel looked disappointed. Not angry. Disappointed. As if I had failed to cooperate with something reasonable. I went home with the folder in my purse and a heavy feeling in my chest. That evening I sat at my kitchen table under the warm yellow light over the sink and read every page slowly. Then I read it again. It wasn't harmless. It wasn't simple. It wasn't a son paying a few bills for his grieving mother. It was access. Broad access. Enough access to move money, manage transfers, control payments, and make a mess so large it could be explained later as confusion. And confusion, once attached to an older woman, is hard to wash off. I did not cry. I did not call Daniel. I did not confront Melissa. I made tea. Chamomile. Too much honey. Then I called my oldest friend, Marlene. We have known each other since 1976. She answered on the second ring and said, "What happened?" Not hello. Not how are you. Just those two words. Women our age learn to hear truth in silence. I told her everything. The comments. The brunch. The folder. She listened without interrupting. Then she said, "Do not sign a single thing." I wasn't planning to. Good. My niece works at Huntington downtown. I'm calling her right now. Her niece's name was Rebecca. She worked in senior account services at the bank. Sharp, calm, efficient. The kind of woman who reads every line before smiling. She got me an appointment the next morning. I wore my gray coat. Brought all my account statements. The folder from brunch. My trust paperwork. Harold's death certificate. A legal pad. And the feeling that I was walking into something bigger than banking. Rebecca met me in a small office with frosted glass walls and a bowl of peppermints on the desk. She offered coffee. I said no. I wanted my head clear. She reviewed the paperwork very carefully. No pity. No rush. No talking down to me. When she finished, she looked up and said, "You were right not to sign this." The relief I felt was sharp enough to hurt. She pointed to one section, then another. This would give your son broad transactional authority if completed together with the linked forms. Not ownership, but significant control. Control. There was the honest word at last. I asked her if Daniel had been in before. She paused. That pause told me the answer before she spoke. Yes. He had visited the branch the week before. He had asked detailed questions about support options for aging parents. He had asked what steps would streamline financial management in case of decline. In case of decline. That phrase settled over me like dust. Not because it was shocking anymore. Because it confirmed what I had already begun to understand. This was not concern. This was positioning. Quiet positioning. Respectable positioning. The kind people defend over dinner by saying, "We were only trying to help." I asked Rebecca what I could do. And that was the moment everything shifted. I stopped thinking like a mother trying not to hurt her son's feelings. I started thinking like a woman protecting the life she had built. Rebecca helped me secure everything. New passwords. New verbal passcodes. A note on the account requiring in-person confirmation for any access changes. No family discussion without written authorization from me. No exceptions. Then she asked if I wanted to add a trusted contact. Not an authorized user. Just someone the bank could call if something ever seemed truly wrong. I gave her Marlene's number. Not Daniel's. That was harder than I expected. There is something painful about choosing someone outside the family to protect you from the family. But there it was. The truth. After the bank, I met with an attorney. Thomas Avery. Gray suit. Quiet voice. Steady eyes. The kind of man who made you feel safer simply by being unimpressed with drama. He reviewed my trust documents and the forms Melissa had prepared. Then he looked at me and said, "Mrs. Whitmore, this is not an emergency. This is positioning." The word fit so perfectly I nearly smiled. That was exactly what it was. Not a misunderstanding. Not an awkward family conversation. Positioning. They were building a story around me. If I resisted, I could be called stubborn. If I forgot anything ordinary, it would become proof. If I accepted help once, it could be used as precedent the next time. Thomas advised me to do 3 things. First, secure every account and every document. Second, update my estate papers while my competence was freshly certified. Third, do nothing reactive. Let them keep talking, he said. People who believe they're being subtle often become careless. He was right. Careless came quickly. For days later, my granddaughter Grace called me from her tablet. She sounded casual at first. Then she said, "Grandma, Mom said you might move to one of those nice places with art classes." I stared at the screen. Did she? Grace nodded. She said it would be easier because you forget things now. Forget things now. Just like that. They were already telling the children. Already turning a strategy into a family truth. I kept my voice warm. "I'm not moving anywhere, sweetheart." Grace frowned. "Oh." Mom sounded pretty sure. After we hung up, I sat in Harold's chair by the window and stared out at the backyard. The bird feeder swung gently in the wind. The maple tree we planted when Daniel started kindergarten was just beginning to bud. My own son was laying the groundwork to make me look less capable to my grandchildren. Not because I was failing, because it would make his next step easier. That night Melissa texted me, "Just checking in. Don't forget lunch on Sunday. We want to talk through some options." Options. That word made my stomach tighten. But I replied politely, looking forward to it. I wanted them comfortable. Comfortable people reveal more than frightened ones. Sunday lunch was at their house. Roast chicken. Green beans with almonds. Lemon water in a glass pitcher. A table set too carefully for what was supposedly a simple family meal. The children were sent upstairs before dessert. That told me everything. Daniel folded his napkin. Melissa sat straighter. The meeting began. "Mom," Daniel said, "we found a wonderful senior community." Melissa smiled. "It's not like a facility. It's more like a neighborhood. Walking paths, activities, book clubs, people your age. People your age." As if I had somehow been trapped among teenagers. Daniel added, "If you sold the house, life would be so much easier for you." There it was. Not just the account. Not just the banking. The house. That beautiful old white house with blue shutters and Harold in every wall. I set my fork down very carefully. The children were laughing upstairs. Melissa's candles smelled like cedar and orange peel. Sometimes the smallest details stay with you when the largest betrayal arrives. "You want me to sell my house," I said. Daniel lifted his hands slightly. "Not want. Just think it makes sense." Melissa leaned in with that polished concern. "We're trying to think ahead." 2 weeks ago they had been worried about my memory. Now they were discussing where to put me and what to do with my home. That is how quickly concern becomes ambition when nobody stops it. I looked at Daniel and said, "Do not discuss my decline as if it were already settled." He sighed. "Mom, please don't make this into something it isn't." That sentence is another dangerous one. Don't make this into something it isn't. Meaning, don't name what we are doing while we are still pretending to be kind. I stood up. Not dramatically. I simply stood, picked up my purse and put on my coat. Melissa looked startled. "Eleanor." "No," I said. "Just that. One word." Then I looked at my son. If I were confused, I told him. I might not notice how rehearsed this sounds. For the first time, Melissa's expression cracked. Only slightly. But I saw it. Then I left. I drove home in light rain and sat at my kitchen table with a yellow legal pad. I made 2 columns. What they said. What they wanted. We're worried about your memory. They wanted access. We want to reduce your stress. They wanted control. We found a wonderful community. They wanted the house. We're only thinking ahead. They wanted me smaller, easier, movable. By the end of that page, everything was clear. The next week I updated my trust. Not dramatically, not vindicatively, precisely. The house would remain protected in trust and could not be sold or occupied by any beneficiary immediately after my death. A substantial portion of my liquid savings would go directly into educational trusts for Grace and Ben. A portion would go to pancreatic cancer research in Harold's name. A portion would go to my church benevolence fund. Daniel would still receive something. I was not trying to destroy my son, but his share would now be structured and limited, with a strong non-contest clause attached. If he challenged the arrangement, he would receive significantly less. Thomas called it a deterrent, called it wisdom. Then I visited my doctor, Karen Liu. She had treated me for years. She ran every appropriate cognitive screen, memory recall, executive function, medication review, orientation. Everything came back normal. More than normal, actually. She smiled and said, "Eleanor, you're sharper than half the people I see 20 years younger." I said, "Would you mind putting that in writing?" She did. Signed. Dated. Official. If they wanted to build a story about my decline, I wanted the truth on letterhead. A few days later, Daniel called. His voice was too casual. "Hey, Mom. Quick question. Did the bank happen to call you about anything?" I was trying to help with some setup, and they got weirdly formal. There it was. He had tried again. Without me. I sat back in my kitchen chair and looked at the sunlight crossing the floor. "Yes," I said. "I spoke with the bank." He went quiet for a second. Then he said, "Oh, yes." Another quiet moment. Then carefully, "What did they say?" "That my accounts are secure." He gave a short, uncomfortable laugh. "Well, of course they are. I was just trying to make sure everything was protected. Protected. Always protected. Always for my own good." I said, "I've also met with my attorney." That changed the temperature of the conversation. "You got a lawyer?" he asked. "I already had one," I said. "Mom, why would you do that?" That question told me more than his earlier ones ever had. Why would I do that? As if preparation were suspicious when it came from me. As if caution belonged to him, not to the woman whose money he was circling. Because, I told him, someone in this family has been making plans for my future without my permission. He got offended then. Not loudly. Daniel rarely raised his voice. But I heard the edge. "Melissa and I are the only ones actually trying to help you," he said. I let him finish. That matters. People will often reveal the truest version of themselves in the extra sentence after they think they've already made their point. Then I said, "If helping me requires my money, my house, and my decisions, then it isn't help." He hung up. That weekend, Melissa posted photos from a family dinner online. Roast beef. Candles. The children smiling. Daniel pouring wine. The caption said, "Quiet family night. Grateful for togetherness." I was not invited. That did not surprise me. But what happened next did. Grace called me the next morning. "Grandma," she whispered, "Dad is mad." "I know, sweetheart. Mom says you don't trust us." I looked out at the backyard. The feeder was empty. The wind had picked up. "I trust what people do," I said gently. "Not just what they say." Grace was quiet. Then she asked, "Are you coming to my choir concert on Thursday?" I paused. "Did your mother invite me?" Silence. Then a whisper. "She said maybe you'd get confused." That was the moment the last softness left me. Not because it hurt most. Because it revealed the whole design. If they could define me, they could manage me. If they could manage me, they could move me. And if they could move me, they could inherit me early. I went to that choir concert anyway. I wore my navy coat and my pearl earrings. I brought flowers for Grace. I sat in the front row. When she walked onto the stage and saw me, her whole face changed. She nearly cried before the music even began. Melissa turned around from 3 rows ahead. The look on her face was worth the drive. Not rage. Not embarrassment. Surprise. She had been so sure of the story she was telling that she forgot I could still walk into the truth myself. After the concert, Grace ran to me. "Grandma, you came." "Of course I did." Melissa approached us with that same polished smile. "We weren't sure you'd remember," she said. I looked her straight in the eye and answered, "That must have been disappointing for you." She froze. Only for a second. But children notice seconds. And Grace noticed that one. By then I had already decided what came next. I was not going to argue piecemeal. I was not going to defend my sanity one family dinner at a time. I was going to end the story they were trying to write about me. So Thomas Avery scheduled a formal family meeting at my house the following Sunday. Not because it was legally necessary, because clarity sometimes needs witnesses. Present in my living room that afternoon were Daniel, Melissa, Thomas, Marlene, and Rebecca from the bank. Yes, I invited the bank representative. Because if my mind had become the subject, I wanted the record held by people who work in facts. Melissa arrived in cream cashmere. Daniel looked tense. Marlene brought lemon bars and a silence sharp enough to cut glass. Rebecca brought a slim folder. Thomas brought calm. We sat in my living room beneath Harold's portrait. The same room where Daniel once built blanket forts with couch cushions. The same room where I had sat up through fevers and homework tears and one very bad breakup when he was 17. Life has a cruel way of making memory stand in the room beside betrayal. Thomas began. "Mrs. Whitmore has asked me to document her wishes and clarify several recent concerns." Melissa folded her hands in her lap and put on her concerned face. "We're just so relieved she's getting support," she said. Thomas did not even glance at her. He looked at me. "Mrs. Whitmore, would you like to begin?" I folded my hands and spoke clearly. "I want it stated plainly that I am fully competent, fully informed, and fully aware that my son and daughter-in-law attempted to obtain financial access by repeatedly suggesting I was experiencing cognitive decline without any medical basis." Melissa inhaled sharply. Daniel flushed. "Mom, that is not fair." Rebecca opened her folder. "I can confirm," she said, "that Mr. Whitmore visited our branch seeking account access information and elder financial management options before any authorization was granted." Daniel looked at her, then at me. Melissa turned toward him, startled. She had not expected documentation. Thomas then placed 3 papers on the coffee table. My doctor's competency letter, my updated trust summary, and the clause outlining the consequences of contesting the trust. Paper makes a beautiful sound in a quiet room. Soft. Final. Daniel read in silence. Melissa's eyes moved quickly. Too quickly. Calculating. Then she tried the familiar voice again. "Eleanor, this is all such a misunderstanding. We only ever wanted what was best for you." "No," I said. "Just that. One quiet word." Then I continued. "You wanted convenience. You wrapped it in concern." Daniel looked genuinely hurt. There are few things more unsettling than being betrayed by someone who still believes himself decent. "Mom," he said, "we were trying to make sure you were safe." I looked at him for a long moment. Then I answered the way only a mother can when the love is still there but the illusion is gone. "Safe from what, Daniel?" "My own checkbook? My own front door? My own life?" He had no answer. So I gave mine. "I raised you to offer help when it was asked for, not to create weakness where there was none." The room stayed quiet. Outside I could hear a lawnmower somewhere down the block. Ordinary life. Moving on. That always amazed me. How betrayal can feel like thunder in one house while the rest of the street goes on trimming hedges and washing cars. Thomas explained the updated trust in plain terms. The house was protected. The educational trusts for the children were protected. The charitable gifts were protected. Daniel's share was limited and controlled. Any formal challenge would reduce it significantly. When Thomas finished, Melissa sat very still. She had the look of a woman mentally reworking a plan in real time. Daniel looked stunned, then wounded, then angry. Not because he had lost money, I think. Not only that. Because for the first time, the version of me they had been discussing privately was not the woman in the room. The woman in the room was prepared. And worse for them, she was calm. Finally Daniel said, "You really think I'd take advantage of you?" I held his gaze. "I think you already tried." That landed harder than shouting ever could have. No one spoke for several seconds. Then Marlene, sweet faithful Marlene, picked up her lemon bar plate and said, "Well, That seems clear. I almost smiled. Melissa stood first. She straightened her sweater and said, I think emotions are high right now. That made me smile after all. Because people always call it emotion when calm truth corners them. I stood too. Not on my side, I said. Daniel looked at me as though he was still waiting for one last rescue. One last motherly softening. One last chance to have this fixed for him. But I was done fixing what he was willing to break. He and Melissa left without hugging me. Without another word. Without taking lemon bars. That part still makes me laugh a little. For weeks afterward, Daniel barely called. Melissa not at all. Then, little by little, practical life continued. As it always does. I kept my Friday banking routine. I drove myself to church. I had lunch with Marlene on Tuesdays. I planted herbs in terracotta pots on the back step. I donated Harold's old workbench to a community workshop program in his name. I kept the house. I kept my routines. I kept myself. Grace started calling more often. Sometimes from her tablet. Sometimes from a friend's phone. Children are smarter than adults give them credit for. She did not say much at first. She mostly asked little questions. What are you cooking? Did Grandpa like baseball? Do you still have that old photo from the lake? One evening she asked very quietly, Grandma, are you mad at Dad? I told her the truth. I'm disappointed in him. She thought about that. Then she said, that sounds worse. It was. Ben took longer. He's younger. Children that age usually follow the emotional weather in the room without understanding the climate. But one Sunday, weeks later, Daniel brought both children over unexpectedly. Just the children. He stayed in the driveway. Did not come inside. When Grace and Ben ran to the door, I opened it before they could knock twice. Ben hugged my waist so hard he nearly knocked me backward. Grandma, he said. Mom said you were busy all the time. I kissed the top of his head. I'm not too busy for you. Daniel stood by the car with both hands in his pockets. Older than I remembered. Smaller somehow. Not physically. Morally. That is the thing about disappointment. It shrinks people in your eyes. I walked the children inside, then turned back to him. He took 2 steps toward the porch. Mom. I waited. He looked down. Then at the flower bed Harold had built from railroad ties 20 years ago. Then finally at me. I thought I was doing the right thing. I believed he believed that. That is what made it sadder. Did you? I asked. He swallowed. I thought you needed help. No, I said. You thought I would be easier to manage if I doubted myself. He flinched. A real flinch. Truth will do that sometimes. We stood there in the quiet. No music. No witnesses. No polished table between us. Just a porch, late afternoon light, and the remains of what used to be simple. Then he said the most honest thing he had said in months. Melissa kept saying if we didn't step in now, everything would become harder later. I nodded slowly. There it was. Not the whole truth, but closer. And for the first time I heard weakness in him instead of authority. I'm sure she did, I said. He looked ashamed. Not enough to undo it, but enough to finally feel it. I did not invite him in right away. That mattered. Forgiveness is not the same thing as immediate access. Boundaries are not cruelty. They are memory with self-respect attached. I told him this. Plainly. I love you, Daniel. That did not change. But love is no longer the same thing as trust. He nodded. He looked like a man who had only just realized those two things could separate. Then I added, if you want a relationship with me, it will be built honestly. Not strategically. Not through Melissa. Not through paperwork. Not through the children. He said yes. Quietly. I believed he meant it in that moment. Whether he could live it was another matter. Time would answer that. It always does. The children stayed all afternoon. Grace helped me make blueberry muffins. Ben built a lopsided blanket fort in the living room and called it Fort Grandma. At one point I stood in the doorway and watched them laughing under my roof, in Harold's house, with flour on the counter and sunlight on the floor, and I thought something I had not allowed myself to think in months. I am not disappearing. That was the real victory. Not the trust. Not the bank. Not the lawyer. Not even the moment Melissa's expression froze in my living room. The victory was this. They had tried to make me smaller in my own mind. They had tried to make me doubt the woman I had spent 71 years becoming. And they failed. Because in the end, what saved me was not anger. It was clarity. It was records. It was preparation. It was the quiet decision not to let anyone narrate my decline for me while I was still standing in the room. These days I still live in the same house. The shutters are still blue. The maple tree still bends in strong wind. Marlene still calls before 8 in the morning, which I still consider unnecessary. Grace comes by when she can. Ben still asks for extra cinnamon in his toast. Daniel and I are careful. That is the honest word. Careful. Sometimes healing begins there. Sometimes it ends there too. Melissa has remained polite. Very polite. That no longer impresses me. I have learned that kindness and strategy can wear the same perfume. If there is anything worth leaving you with tonight, it is this. When someone starts questioning your mind without cause, pay attention. When concern comes carrying paperwork, read every line. When family starts speaking for you before you have finished your own sentence, stop the conversation early. And when people call control love, believe your unease before you believe their smile. I loved my son. I still do. But love does not mean surrender. Age does not mean permission. And being a mother does not require becoming easy to move. I did not lose my mind. I found my footing. And once I did, they could no longer mistake my silence for weakness. If you stayed with me to the end, thank you. Tell me where you're listening from. And tell me this. Have you ever had someone disguise control as concern? Because if you have, you already know. The softest voice in the room is not always the safest one.